Hey there, I'm Alex Larrabee, also known as BaerTaffy online. I'm here to host the topic today of everything you wanted to know about YouTubers, but were too afraid to ask, which we're going to say is probably one of the more ironic titles of this year's GDC, considering how if you thought you were a social, invert, you're going to find that a lot of YouTubers are pretty terrified of any sort of social interaction outside of talking to ourselves in our bedrooms. Beyond that, though, here's a little bit about me. I have an early history of broadcasting and promotion due to local radio for a few years. And then I decided that radio was, well, I didn't decide this, but I found of my own volition that radio was a dying industry, and then decided to make a dramatic career shift. Getting into a full-time job, I then started making YouTube content in early 2012. I started making an indie-centric focus from that point on, covering games such as Spelunky, Thomas Was Alone, Papers, Please, Elemental, Warp, and Nuclear Throne, and then more recently, things like Darkest Dungeon. I've also been live streaming on Twitch TV, in a similar vein since mid-2013 or so. Well, the majority of my content falls under what you call the Let's Player umbrella. I've also delved into proper reviews. My review/showcase series Barely Played was hosted on youtube.com/videogames for a little while, and my indie spotlight segment, which many of you may be familiar with if you know who I am, was hosted on GOG.com and the GOG Twitch page for a little while as well. On top of my YouTube and Twitch work, my most recent project is the Roundtable podcast, hosted by myself, Northern Lion, Rockley Smile, and Mathis Games. 3 YouTuber content creators who I'll probably be recommending to you a little bit later today. Now, YouTubers. What can YouTubers do for you as an independent developer? We'll be talking about that, along with how YouTubers interact with developers and vice versa. Frequently asked questions I've seen on these topics, what you can do to help us, how we go about our processes, my particular process in deciding what kind of games to cover, which YouTubers I can recommend you contact, along with some additional resources that should be able to help you out in this process. First, let's talk about what YouTubers can actually do for your game, and what they can do for you as an independent developer. And it's becoming less of an industry secret that YouTubers are kind of giving a little bit more of a boost than traditional gaming press has in recent history. It's not uncommon to see that a moderately sized YouTube channel can provide you maybe even a bit better of a boon or a boost to your game's success and reception than being covered on more of a traditional gaming press site such as Kotaku or Game Informer. There are plenty of examples of indie success stories spurring from YouTube coverage and gameplay directly. I have just a few examples I'd like to share with you of independent developers who have experienced symbiotic success with YouTubers and Twitch broadcasters over the last few years. Now, these quotes are all taken from developers I've gotten to know myself over the course of my time on YouTube and Twitch, which is actually an important element to note, is the fact that I have gotten to know them and vice versa. The first comes from Eric Asmussen, the creator of Robot Roller Derby Disco Dodgeball. When I asked him whether he felt that YouTube and Twitch coverage of his game resulted in a notable impact on the game's success, he said, quote, "I 100% agree. For most of the game's development, up until a month before launch or so, it received effectively zero press coverage and wasn't so much as mentioned in the large mainstream games press. Yet because of YouTube coverage, I was able to build up a large enough community to sustain a multiplayer game, besides earning sustainable revenue from early access purchases. Anecdotally, almost every single player I ran into said they found out about the game from some large YouTube video. So without YouTube, the game certainly would have been dead in the water at launch." I also approached Daigut Fabric developer Douglas Wilson with the same question regarding his game package Sports Friends, which, in his own words, is kind of a really weird game. If anybody's familiar with it, it's the game where you take large, phallic-shaped instruments and try to whack a ball on a string toward your other player's goal. So, it's a niche audience, if anything. He said, quote, "I 100% agree. For most of the game's development, up until a month..." Oh, sorry, no, that's Eric's quote. He said the exact same thing. How weird is that? His response, quote, "We're probably a weird outlier. We had a PewDiePie video a week before it went live on PSN that has a lot of views. But since it was pre-launch, it's difficult to tell whether YouTube directly impacted our success. We didn't have that much stream coverage in general. A few people did individual videos, but local multiplayer is probably a tough sell for streamers. It does seem to me YouTube and stream coverage is a better sell for games you can immediately go buy and play yourself. However, he then went on to detail for me an interesting sales spike he couldn't really attribute to anything in particular. Quote, our sales on PSN SCEE in the European region increased in December and January. The curve is still going up, which is really atypical since it wasn't really on sale. I looked at the sales breakdown and we had a huge spike in Saudi Arabia, which I think may be tied to a video made by a Saudi Arabian Let's Player. 300,000 views isn't huge, well, for a lot of people it is, myself included, but it seems to be indicative of that spike. Now, simply put, YouTubers have been proven to make a strong and noticeable impact on game sales and reception. It's one of the most mutually beneficial and symbiotic relationships in the industry, and more people are beginning to realize that. For many of you, though, it's fair to assume that not just getting to that point, but actually making that first connection or trying to get that first person to play your game is the stepping stone worth considering. As I mentioned prior to quoting the preceding developers' comments, those developers I spoke to I consider unique in my own experiences. It's rare for me to see developers that are an engaged and active part of the community of those who they're trying to reach out to. So that leads to one of my first and most hearty recommendations to you as a developer, which is to be engaged. There isn't a much better way to catch the interest and attention of someone with an audience than to become an outstanding member of that audience. Now, this isn't to say you should line up a queue of their videos, leaving a thumbs up on every single one and becoming the biggest fanboy or fangirl of all time for them. Instead, you're much better off seeking out and following and looking into YouTube creators that are genuinely appealing to you. It's not exactly like a game of matchmaker. You don't need to go to Match.com and find them, but it's pretty damn close to that. You will benefit tremendously by seeking out and interacting with YouTube creators whose interests and personalities not only reflect your own to a certain extent, but also represent the kind of coverage that you're looking for when it comes to covering your game. And it goes beyond simply finding someone that enjoys the genre your game falls under as well. There are an extremely wide variety of YouTube personalities, big and small. Oh, that's too far of a slide. Let's just skip to the end, right? This is getting boring. Sorry about that. Oh, it's a spoiler too. No, that's the big one. There we go. All right. Knowing what kind of coverage you're looking for, and there we go. So you'll benefit tremendously from seeking out and interacting with YouTubers whose interests and personalities not only reflect your own, as I mentioned before. Now, it's up to you to decide the kind of relationships you want to pursue with the caveats in mind of knowing what kind of feedback and what kind of response you're hoping to expect. So let's take Markiplier, for example. Markiplier is one of the biggest names in YouTube's gaming scene today. If you've watched any sort of YouTube coverage on a game or watch YouTube at all, you probably know who Markiplier is. But for those of you who don't, he's established himself as kind of a goofy, fun-loving guy. He's got a massive audience, and he's generally pretty fun and easygoing. Tends to make the games he's playing and covering look quite a bit more fun than they may actually be. Although he has been also known to take a proverbial dump on the games that he doesn't enjoy so much. And consequently, I imagine his email inbox is probably bursting at the seams with indie developers looking for coverage for millions of people. Alternatively, we can look at a channel like Jim Sterling, who is known for being hilariously critical and will rip your game a new one if he sees fit to, and he doesn't steer away from games he deems as shite. Now, weighing these against one another, Mark may be the obvious choice if you are guaranteed coverage on your game. But the benefits of Jim's coverage actually may be more beneficial to you. And depending on your needs, you may want to pursue channels known more for critical coverage than those that can simply just get thousands of eyeballs looking at your game at once. Joe Mirabello, the developer of Tower of Guns, put it well in a way that I think aids this point. Quote, certain press cater towards certain games. Don't waste the time of press who won't be interested in your game. Similarly, get to know the YouTuber or Twitch broadcaster. If you know they're going to slam your game for something, is it worth fixing that something? Or are you better off not pursuing that feedback? Once you've found the audiences you're looking for and begun engaging with the personalities leading those groups, you want to begin the actual process of introducing that person to your game. Now, let's start with the basics of this interaction, which may sound trivial, but you would be surprised how many people I find could actually use this level of instruction. Now, first, we want to compose an email. Make sure you find their official email address as well, either listed on the About tab of their YouTube channel or on their Twitter profile, their Facebook page, something that is an official representation of the person. You'd be surprised, too, to learn that there is an influx of people trying to impersonate YouTubers, make fake email addresses. You know, in my experience, too, there was actually a person impersonating me by using the correct spelling of bear, which I guess I brought on myself to a certain extent. First, we need to compose the email, and the construction of this email is pretty subjective, but outlined here are my key guidelines for what I hope to see in receiving emails from developers. Number one, be succinct. I know you want to gush about your baby, right? I know you want to tell me about the innovations and the brand new gaming experiences that we've never even heard of before. Please tamper it down. I know it's perfectly fine and encouraged, of course, to be excited about what you're offering, but we read right past the fluff. The fluff, the hype words, they all just go right through the filter, and my brain has kind of trained itself to fly right by what I deem as the non-critical information in the body of developer emails. You want to get to your point in the emails as quickly as you possibly can, while of course also offering all the information that you feel we need to best experience your game. Number two, include code or download, and we're speaking, of course, within your first email or your first correspondence with us. I won't pretend to understand the intricacies of obtaining code from Steam or Desura or any other distribution platform, but what I can tell you is the odds of yourself, or myself rather, and others deciding to cover your game skyrocket when you include code or a copy of the game within your introductory email. While it may seem like a good idea to, ping interest, I advise against it for these purposes because including download codes for your game is entirely preferable for us. Direct downloads, of course, are all right as well. I realize that not everybody has the opportunity to be able to upload their game to a distribution platform, at least a major one, but direct downloads are also good if you can do that. Number three, have a trailer. You want to make it a good one as well. This is almost necessary these days. The gameplay trailers, and please make sure they include the actual gameplay from your game, are a threshold that can make or break an email. I remember multiple instances where the description of a game didn't actually do that much to sell me on it, but then I viewed the trailer and my opinion on it was changed drastically. A well-made trailer is of critical importance. And whether you are able to make one yourself or you have to shill out a little bit of money to make, or have someone else make a good one for you, I strongly encourage you to make it a part of your pitch. Number four, personalize it. No blanket emails, which I realize probably resulted in a lot of internalized groans out there, but I promise this is just as valuable of an investment of your time as all the other recommendations. We as YouTubers, we know what the blanket emails look like. We see them all the time. We have a trained eye for them. And tying directly into what I mentioned earlier, a personal touch on your email does wonders. Going back to what I said about how you can make yourself an engaged and outstanding member of an audience, if you've gone through the trouble of doing so, there's a strong chance your email probably won't even need to be a standard pitch. It won't be the icebreaker. There's even a chance you could reach out to them on Twitter and, ask them if you can send a copy of your game. At that point, you just need to send an email with a link, and then you're good to go. The more conversational and candid your approach can be, the better your chance of success. Now, on the other side of this coin, if you absolutely must send out a blanket email, we need you to do us all a favor and not CC a laundry list of YouTubers in your emails to us, please, for the love of everyone. You don't want it just as much as we don't want it. BCC is your friend. If you don't know what BCC is, you click right under the CC and there's the BCC. In fact, just use that for everything. Can we just all agree on that? Just no CC for anyone ever? Okay, good. Number five, be persistent, but don't be annoying, which, of course, is easy to say, difficult to do. There's nothing wrong with sending a follow-up email a week or two after your initial contact. You can ping us once, but anything beyond that much is kind of iffy on Twitter, or even leave a YouTube comment. Side note here, don't use YouTube messages ever. Not only does no one ever read them, I'm pretty sure half the time they don't actually get sent, and they're just, that error page when YouTube fails to load something, there's like a team of highly trained monkeys. That's usually where it goes. I understand the backlog a lot of these folks are experiencing as well. The larger channels tend to have an almost exponential amount of emails to deal with. Again, this can tie back to the idea of making yourself out to be that engaged member of their community. You want to be nice and courteous, of course, but once you've pestered them to the point where you start to think for yourself, am I being annoying? it might be time to accept silence as a response and hope that one day they can come back to your game. In congruence with this, I want to share with you all my personal process for choosing what games to cover among those ones that are sent to me. Now, for perspective, I am probably going to fall into the small to medium tier of channels that cover indie games primarily. My views to subscribers ratio is slightly above average, but again, these teams tend to fluctuate all over the place. And with that in mind, it's worth noting that I receive anywhere from 10 to 15 emails a week from developers requesting coverage for their games. As I mentioned, this number tends to rise near exponentially for the larger channels. And while I begin to detail my individual process for sifting through these emails, I encourage you to refer back to the guidelines I listed for how to compose your own and how they correlate to what it is that I do in my personal process. And as far as that goes, it tends to begin with what I like to call star it for later. Every developer email I get receives a quick skim, and if it seems interesting to me, I mark it as important and I set it aside. Then when I get a chance during any odd day, I'll sit down and I'll go in depth into the emails I have set aside. And this is where the actual process of choosing the games to play and cover begins for me. The first thing I'll do is make sure the email includes a code or a direct download for the game. And I've also begun doing this most of the time before I even start to skim through the emails. So just to stress the importance of that, make sure that's involved. Now, so long as that's covered, I'll begin thoroughly reading through the description of the game, at which point I'll start to notice the fluff words, as I mentioned before, the descriptors that are attempting to oversell the game, which is where I'm often turned off to the idea of covering them. And after I've garnered a decent understanding of what to expect, I'll check for a trailer. I'll be perfectly clear on this point, as I mentioned before, they've often been the difference for me as far as deciding whether or not to move to the next step of the covering process. Now, preferably the trailer comes in under 90 seconds or so and contains actual gameplay from the game itself, giving me an excellent idea of what to expect the first time I boot it up and play it for the first time. If all ends up well to this point, I tend to download the game and pass it through yet another step in the process, throwing it in with the games to play pile, which, yes, I know, even going through the email gauntlet, there's more to it. However, the grand majority of the ones that make it to this portion do end up receiving coverage in some way, shape, or form. I try to play as many of the games, or as many of the ones I've been able to set aside, rather, in my email as I possibly can. And again, as I mentioned, the majority of the ones that make it to this point do end up getting covered, if not on my YouTube or Twitch channels, but something like the podcast, something like Steam curation, a number of opportunities there now. But unfortunately, if your game does get to this point and is not covered, that likely results in the end of our correspondence. Now, that's a good segue into me shamefully admitting that I'm god-awful at responding to emails. More to the point, I'm extremely unlikely to respond to you if you reach out to me about covering a game. And I won't make any assumptions, but you can kind of expect a similar response percentage from the majority of the YouTubers and the Twitch broadcasters you try to contact. As mentioned, don't be afraid to follow up, but know that it's extremely likely your email just ends up in the nether of the incessantly overflowing inbox. Now, to provide further aid, I've compiled a small list of questions I've seen in the past regarding interactions between developers and YouTubers. Number one, how can I, as a developer, help? And the best things you can do for us are A, as I mentioned, provide code freely and upfront. B, be on Twitter, please. Please be on Twitter. The YouTube messages don't work. Twitter is a wonderful resource that is the primary social media tool of choice for a lot of YouTubers, at least many of the ones within my immediate circle. And it's an incredibly valuable free resource for you to try to put yourself in the position of being an engaged member of an audience. And C, be insistent. Remind us. And I mention that again because it helps you just as much as it helps us. Sometimes all we need is a reminder that there was a cool game in our inbox that we need to check out. Number two, what do you look for when choosing what to cover beyond just those initial email guidelines? This one, unfortunately, is entirely subjective, but for the purposes of my personal recommendations, I can give you a general idea of what it is that I tend to look for. I tend to prefer emails that get right down to the point of what their game is and what they represent. Some of my favorite emails come in where they just say, hey, this is my name, here's my game, here's the trailer, here's the code, enjoy. Like, seriously, that may be all you need. Again, the great trailers are important. Artwork is nice, it's not really necessary, but it does help to establish the aesthetic and the atmosphere of your game beforehand sometimes, in addition to the trailer content. And detailing my preference of genre here is probably not going to be the most helpful response, so I won't get into that as much. However, I will mention again the guidelines I referenced earlier for composing your introductory email do well here in what it is I'm looking for, namely the brevity, ease of access, a satisfactory presentation of the game, and a personal approach. Number 3, how should I interpret it when you don't respond to my email? Now, unfortunately, there's not much I can tell you regarding ways to get feedback on your game when YouTubers don't respond to your coverage requests. And I'm empathetic to how frustrating that is as well. As a YouTuber, I tend to reach out to a lot of people and I'm met with complete silence. And that's the most difficult response to deal with, is the lack of one. It doesn't really provide you with any valuable information apart from, I didn't find this to be worthy of my time, which is not the message we want to send, because then I'd look like a complete asshole up here if I just said, you all just don't bother. I'm far too important for this. And considering how rarely I respond to these emails, of course, that's not the message we want to send. Now, bear in mind a couple of possibilities when you don't receive a response. Now, if we assume you've taken heed to the aforementioned advice, namely employing a personal approach and outfitting your email accordingly, there are 2 likely scenarios that occur. The first of them is the YouTuber just didn't like what they saw. That sucks. And unfortunately, without feedback, there's not a lot you stand to gain from that result. Now, the second scenario is that the YouTuber simply needs a reminder that the game exists. They wanted to play it, but they forgot. Just where the follow-up email comes into play, and just, the pinging on Twitter, things like that. And then if you don't receive a response to the follow-up email, you can revert back to the first scenario, which, again, sucks, but sadly, that's usually the way things end down the road. I'd like to share with you guys now some resources that will hopefully make your interactions with YouTubers much more successful. First, a package that many of you are likely already aware of. It's Vlambeer's Do Distribute and Do Press Kit tools. Do Distribute is a developer tool that helps you to manage press lists, easily send and allow for requests of preview and review copies, parse emails, verify press contacts, among other very valuable things. And Press Kit, of course, is just a very easy-to-use tool if you understand the basics of constructing these sort of things to allow you to build a very good press release. Both of these create a very desirable presentation and representation of your game and development brand. I love both of them. I love the things that they produce on my end much, or even more so than what they do for you guys. So I highly recommend using either or both of these tools if you have the opportunity to do so. Next is the big list of YouTubers compiled by Pixel Prospector. This is an absolutely fantastic resource put together that's available to you absolutely free of charge. And it provides you with that big giant list of YouTubers that could potentially be playing your game. Within the list, you can search for YouTubers that enjoy a certain genre of games, as well as filtering them by the languages that they speak. So if the game is not native to English, then you have quite a good chance of finding somebody that could potentially showcase your game as well. If you want to find like a German Let's Player that loves real-time strategy, this should be the first place that you start your search. And all these links, by the way, will be available in the GDC Vault storage of this presentation. I also like to recommend my close personal friends that provide a wide variety of coverage for you guys. Will likely give your game a chance. Northern Lion is a name that many of you may already be familiar with. His Let's Look At series covers everything from early access games to new releases, RTS, FPS, puzzle platformer, action adventure, you name it, he's probably covered it. In a similar vein, Rockley Smile is who you want to approach with not just those things in mind, but also potentially the weird and obscure stuff. He's hosted the Indie Impressions series for over 1,000 consecutive episodes now and shows no signs of slowing down. And he combs through all the websites looking for stuff to play, so if you offer him a very simple presentation of your game, he is very likely to give you a positive response. There's also Mathis Games, who is currently seeing resounding success with his channel. Hosts the Judge Mathis series, takes a look at new releases, as well as Under the Hood, which focuses on early access games. And finally, if you're looking for mobile game coverage, which I'm sure there's a contingent of you out there who are looking for that, I recommend Game Mob. You'll find all their links of their channels in my presentation files as well. Now in closing, even though I know I spoiled it, but let's just pretend we didn't, I want to share with you what I consider to be one of the best YouTuber and developer interactions that I've not only taken a part of, but also those I've seen in recent memory. Spelunky developer Derek Yu shared his insight with me on the topic of Spelunky's pre-release week. Quote, "We asked you and a few other LPers if you could help us promote Spelunky's daily challenge before its debut on Steam. And the reason was that you guys are way better than me at getting across what's cool about the game. I have a tough time describing Spelunky in words or in a short trailer. People know what platformers are and they know what roguelikes are, but unless you play it yourself or watch someone else play, it can be hard to imagine why a game that combines both might be cool. YouTube and Twitch are better than demos, since a lot of players give up quickly when they don't understand a game or if it's too challenging. So many fans have told me that they didn't like Spelunky when they first played it, and it took someone else they trusted raving about it to even get them to try it again and eventually get hooked. The videos are so easy to pass around as well. They're like stories. I loved reading about Bananasaurus Rex's solo eggplant run on Polygon. It's great. It's such an honor to know that people like your game enough to do those things, and I never even known about it without LPers and streamers. Nor would a lot of people. Interacting with streamers and YouTubers, from my experience, they're a lot like indie developers. I just give them space and let them do what they're good at. Now we can open the floor to questions if there are any. Thank you.
All right, we're going to swap laptops, and while we do so, we can have like 2 questions for Alex. And Bennett, wherever you are, I can't see, come on up.
So similar to giving codes for games, what if the game requires an account? Do you give them just a register link with a code to get in, or do you register an account for them ahead of time?
Right. So for the posterity of the video, the question was, what about games, or what about online games perhaps requiring an account for access? Do you include the account information with that email? The answer is definitely yes. Just like you would include the Steam code. The purpose of it really is just to make it as easy as humanly possible for them to jump right from the email to playing your game straight away. So yeah, absolutely. If you have something that requires online registration, then definitely include that information. Perhaps even set up an account for them ahead of time. That would probably be ideal.
Right, thank you.
Yep.
What is your recommendation on how long the trailer should be when you're trying to go through all the email that you get on a daily basis?
Mm-hmm. The question just in general is how long you think the trailer should be. I think I mentioned it, I think under 90 seconds or so is typically good. I don't really make like a very particular discernation between lengths and trailers or anything of that sort, but I found that as I'm watching things, it's kind of like, it actually kind of relates to the attention span a lot of people have when like watching my own YouTube videos. I tend to find that, you know, that audience retention graph dips down pretty damn significantly after the 60 to 90 second portion. So the more you can contain in that, of course, the better. But, you know, 90 seconds or less is typically pretty good.
That last example you gave about a great interaction kind of seemed a little at odds with your call for brevity.
Mm-hmm.
And could you talk a little bit about kind of the give and take there?
I'm sorry, can you...
Could you talk a little bit about the give and take between brevity and length? Because that last thing you talked about seemed a little lengthy, which seemed a little at odds when you said you prefer brief things.
Okay. So, yeah, well, I think, I'm not sure if there's maybe a little bit of confusion in that. I think the brevity corresponds directly to the email itself. So, like, the shorter the email, the more succinct and more critical information is included in just, you know, like the immediate first paragraph or two. Let's just even say just like one paragraph would be awesome. I think the... I'm not sure exactly what it was.
Well, what was the context of that conversation? It sounded, I thought maybe it was the email they sent to you to try to get you to cover the...
Oh, which person?
Spelunky.
Oh, that, okay, so yeah, they didn't actually approach me, so I approached them about Spelunky, but as far as them approaching me about the event that they were doing with us, the pre-release week event, so that actually did fall very well categorically under the idea of the brevity. So they said to us, there was 5 of us in total that did that, and they said to us, hey, we want to do a pre-release event. Are you interested? And here's, like, you know, minor details, like it's going to be 5 days, do the daily challenge thing, stuff like that. So I think they employed a similar approach to it, but I hope I maybe touched a little bit more closer onto what you were asking there.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. And thank you guys very much for attending.